Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. This is the third installment of a three-part series of interviews with the extraordinary Diane Ravitch. Ms. Ravitch is an historian, lecturer, essayist, and former college professor who has spent 5 decades analyzing public education and pushing relentlessly for improvement. She is the founder and president of the Network for Public Education, and she has now written a compelling memoir titled An Education: How I Changed My Mind About Schools and Almost Everything Else. In this segment, we'll be asking Ms. Ravitch to draw on the vast experience of her private and public life to give us her best thoughts about the tumultuous era we're living through right now, the politics, the culture, our schools, and our daily lives. Diane, welcome.
Wonderful to be with you, Bob.
Soon after the presidential election of 2000, you were invited to be a member of the National Commission on Federal Election Reform. The chairmen were former presidents Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. And the goal was pretty simple: to encourage every eligible voter to vote and to make sure that all votes were fairly and accurately counted. Talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Well, we had just gotten through the election of 2000, where the outcome came down to hanging chads in Florida. And it was a fiasco, and there were weeks of waiting to find out whether it was Al Gore or George W. Bush. In Florida, the governor of Florida was George W. Bush's brother, Jeb Bush, which was sort of an advantage. And I don't know whether the election was rightly decided or wrongly decided, probably wrongly decided, but
the Supreme Court intervened and basically decided it.
Yeah, the Supreme Court basically shut off the recount that should have happened. And so there was a commission established by Congress, and the 2 former presidents were the chairs, and the commission was completely bipartisan, and a lot of very well-known political figures were on the commission. And I guess there were debates about what kind of identification would be appropriate for a voter. And in many states, you didn't need identification. A hunting license was identification. A credit card was identification. And the committee debated this a lot and didn't recommend an ID like a driver's license. I was in favor of it because I thought, well, you need a social security card or some kind of secure identification to get on an airplane, and voting is just as important. So I was one of those pushing for a secure ID, but I don't think that was part of the recommendations. I think that what the focus was on was making sure that everyone who was eligible had the right to vote. What is striking to me about that now is that the whole federal government under Trump seems to be pushing to make voting harder and to exclude people, to narrow the number of voting places available. I remember one of the recommendations of our commission was to allow provisional voting, where if you didn't have any ID, if you thought you were eligible but you couldn't prove it, you could vote and then your vote would later be counted. So there were all sorts of steps recommended that would make it easier to vote and make sure that every vote was accurately counted. One of the debates was about paper ballots versus machines. Mm-hmm. And so the commission reviewed different kinds of computer machines. And I felt uneasy because I thought that a machine could more easily be hacked than paper ballots. So I was a paper ballot person. And the machines, they reviewed several that were available at that time. I'm sure they're much more sophisticated now. But I was very concerned about the prospect of someone hacking, whether it was a foreign or a domestic entity, hacking into our elections. But again, the striking thing is both Republicans and Democrats agreed everyone who was eligible should vote, and voting should be made as easy and as accessible as possible.
Right. And what we've had is subsequently is just the opposite. I mean, you've mentioned the voter suppression, making it more difficult to vote. We've had the Voting Rights Act completely undermined by the Supreme Court. And then we had that catastrophic attack on the U.S. Capitol back on January 6th, 2021.
Since Trump was elected, he has steadily undermined the belief in the electoral system, and that he says elections are rigged, and now everybody says if they lose, they say the election was rigged.
Yeah.
And it's become something that I had never experienced in my life, because I always believed that when the results came out, that was it. That was a fair result. And now whoever loses says the election was rigged, because that's what Trump has normalized.
So now I'm going to ask you to take off your public hat, your professional hat, and just as an American citizen, looking as broadly as possible. It's a big question. Talk about how you personally feel about what is happening in this country now.
I think for the first time in my life that I feel that our nation is in a crisis unlike any other. And you might say, well, the Civil War was worse. Maybe it was, but this is our time, and we have a more democratic government than we had at the time of the Civil War, and the comparisons are kind of ridiculous anyway. I feel that our democracy is in peril, and that there are forces at work to undermine voting, to undermine our democracy, that people openly speculating about whether the 26th election might be canceled. We have president is thinking of invoking the Insurrection Act,
Right.
And that this would be an excuse to cancel the next election.
The next presidential election.
Elections of 26 or the next.
Oh, you mean even the congressional election?
Yeah, that and because the party in power always loses seats.
Right.
And if they lose seats, they lose control of the House, and that's.
And it's looking kind of grim.
Yeah,
it's
looking
difficult
bad.
to make predictions,
Right.
but it's looking grim
Yeah.
for the Republicans.
So I just feel that I lived my life believing that we were a progressive country, and that we had a lot of horrible incidents and trends and things that happened in our history that we have to be very honest about. We're now living in a time where the federal government is actively trying to suppress history, rewrite history, censor history, and censor freedom of speech at the same time that they complain about cancel culture when they're the ones who are canceling.
Right.
We live in a time where the people who are, to me, the bad guys in American history, whether it's the Ku Klux Klan, the John Birch Society, they seem to be running the country, and they seem to be running the presidency. And so this idea I had that we were a progressive society seems to be slipping away. I always thought we went, 2 steps forward, 1 step back,
Right.
maybe 3 steps back, but then we would recover and move forward. And I think about the great eras of the New Deal, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then the Great Society with Lyndon B. Johnson, and the kind of gradual progress we've made towards being a more just and a more caring society, and all of that's being wiped away. And I've never in my lifetime seen anything like the efforts today to roll back the Voting Rights Act, or to turn the Civil Rights Act on its head,
Right.
and to say that the Civil Rights Act is really intended to protect fragile white men, not minorities who were dispossessed or who were powerless. And the federal government has been placed as the bad guy, has now had that role in our society of actually expanding the inequality
Right.
amongst different groups of people, increasing the power and wealth of the 1%. And we see this huge chasm opening up. I had a letter the other day from Bernie Sanders saying that the 1% owns more, has greater wealth than 93% of the population. That's probably the worst in our history. And it's behind most of the problems, social problems that we have in our society. And yet this administration is contributing to it, not trying to diminish it. And the attacks on environmental reform, the encouragement, let's say removing all the regulation of toxic chemicals, saying that climate change doesn't exist, canceling the funding of wind farms because the president doesn't like wind farms, and then opening up almost everything to drilling, the Alaska wilderness. So it's
He's trying to bring back the coal industry.
yeah, and that was the last thing was kill the wind farms and bring back clean coal. I don't know what clean coal is.
Exactly.
Coal, by definition, is not clean. And then when I think about what's happening with the Health and Human Services, where they're eliminating vaccines for young children and vaccines for almost everybody, and people are being put into positions of power who should remain outside because they have weird conspiracy theories about health, and the canceling of research. This is something that keeps me awake at night when I think about we have been a leader in the world in Nobel Prizes, not peace prizes, prizes for science and innovation and technology, and the people who do that work are being defunded. They're being defunded in the university campuses and also in different branches of the National Institutes of Health. I don't understand it. It seems like our society is being pushed backwards. Sometimes we fall into deep holes of our own making. This is one where the federal government is pushing us backward maybe 100 years. And I don't know how long it'll take to recover from that, but it won't be easy.
Or if you can fully recover. I agree. And I had the same view. I always had the same view you had. That obviously, this was an imperfect country. Nobody, I don't think anyone was arguing otherwise. But I always felt that this was a country that was moving in the right direction. You're right. You know, sometimes you take a few steps forward and then you take a step or two back. There'd be backlash or that sort of thing. But I always felt, I always believed in progress, and we're not there. We're not there now. You know.
Yeah, and you know, you think about the fact that we now have billions of dollars supporting ICE, which is created a force of armed, masked men who run around in unmarked vehicles, knocking people's windows, smashing their windows and dragging them out and handcuffing them, and no warrant, and they're gone.
People being disappeared in the United States of America.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just horrifying, and I'm really, really upset about the anti-immigrant sentiment, because while I certainly don't support open borders, there has to be a reasonable way for people to enter this country legally, and then once they're in the country, to have a path to citizenship. At the current time, there is no path to citizenship.
Right.
And I think this is not America. I mean, John F. Kennedy wrote a book called A Nation of Immigrants. George W. Bush recently published a book of his paintings, which were paintings of immigrants.
Yep.
I mean, this has been part of the sort of the woof and warp of American life. It's the weave of American life is diversity. And now diversity is considered a bad word, and universities are being told you must not mention the word diversity, equity, or those words, diversity, equity, or inclusion, or you'll lose your grants. You'll lose your grants for scientific research. It is totally insane. And I just can't imagine that there's not a great majority of people horrified by what's happening to this country.
The war on diversity has reached a manic stage, and it's working. I mean, I think a lot of these companies that really didn't want DEI programs anyway were happy to throw them overboard. You know, Trump is stepping all over the idea that the diversity of America is a strength, that there's something positive about the diversity of our society and culture. So talk a little bit about diversity and what happens if you continue to wage war on diversity in America. Well,
first of all, it's idiotic to wage war on diversity because it's like saying, I don't want the sun to rise tomorrow.
Right.
We are a diverse nation.
It's a diverse
I mean, I looked at the figures recently and I saw that about 50%, maybe 51% of the population is white. That number's going to go down. And it's not because anyone wants it to, it's just going to happen.
Right.
20% of the population is Hispanic, and another 30% is non-white. It's people of color, it's Hispanics, it's Asians.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we are a diverse society, and you can't change that by passing a law or a rule or an executive order. And college campuses are going to still want students who are from different backgrounds, because it makes for a more interesting and a more lively discussion of issues and it's also, I think, a kind of social responsibility. So when I mentioned my own college, I said it was quite amazing to see that almost 50% of the women at my alma mater are not Caucasian women. They're coming from all over the world. They have a large international student body. But this administration is closing the doors. They're closing the doors not only to international students, but to people from other countries. And tourism is falling off. This is very bad for the country. The pushing out all these immigrants, many of whom have led exemplary lives, and they're undocumented because there's no path to citizenship. Many years ago, I had someone who was asked me for help. How do you get citizenship? And I called up an immigration lawyer.
Right.
And I said, I want to help this guy. He's Hispanic. He's very hardworking. He's in construction. He can do anything. He can do electricity. He can do plumbing. He can do whatever. And he said, well, you'd have to marry him.
Oh, my God.
And I said, I can't do that. I'm already married. And
Isn't that something?
I think at this point, they're actually deporting people who are married to American citizens.
Oh, yes.
So it's absolutely crazy because if they succeed, which I don't think they will, but to the extent they succeed, they are crippling the agriculture industry, the construction industry, the hospitality industry, the tourist industry. Hotels will suffer. And when people say, well, we'll create jobs for Americans, which Americans are going to want to go into the fields and pick the crops and plant the crops?
Right.
I don't know them. If they wanted to, I'm sure they could get a job. Which of them are going to be the maids in the hotels and clean people's rooms?
They won't be able to get enough workers. They won't be able to get the number of workers that they need.
No. Who's going to work in the restaurants as waiters and as in the back, washing dishes? I mean, there's so many industries where we rely on newcomers who then invest in their children's education, who then become professionals. That's the American dream. That's the American story. And what Trump and Stephen Miller and his Kristi Noem, this gang wants to do is shut the door and say, it's over. This great experiment is ended.
Well, you mentioned, what's happened with researchers and scientists and that sort of thing, which is really insane. I mean, they're being smothered, and many are leaving. And it makes me think about back in World War II, how many scientists and researchers, and for that matter, artists and writers, fled Europe and fled Nazi Germany. And many came to the United States, and how much we benefited from their expertise and from them becoming part of our society. And
Yes.
now we're doing the reverse. We're sending all these talented people away. And then also when you talk about research and medicine and that sort of thing, the quality of our lives today is a result of the research and the medicine and then the scientists and all the work they did over so many decades before us. And now we're rolling back the clock on that.
And also ending the funding for research on, for example, pediatric cancer. Why would you do? Why would anyone do that?
Don't these folks have families? Don't they have kids?
Ending the research on Alzheimer's, ending the research on dementia. I mean, these are fields where people are making genuine breakthroughs that change people's lives. I mentioned in our last interview that my young son died in 1966 of acute leukemia. He was 2 years old. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen much anymore. At least 80% of the kids with that disease now survive into adulthood. That's because of the great investment we've made into cancer research, into leukemia research. We're ending medical research because it pleases them, and I don't know why they're pleased by it.
But what voters think this is a good idea? It's bizarre to me. And so anyway, you mentioned inequality in the Bernie Sanders letter, and the famous quote from the Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis: "We can have a democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both." And what we're getting now, of course, is insane concentration of wealth. I mean, Elon Musk has received the compensation package that could approach $1 trillion. I mean, that's sort of, as you pointed out, I mean, the wealth and income inequality in this country has reached insane levels. I think a lot of people don't understand why that's so dangerous. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, having wealth inequality and income inequality at the levels it is today, which are probably the highest, the greatest division that there's ever been in our society, even including the 1890s when it was very bad.
The Gilded Age.
First of all, it creates angry people. Secondly, I think that it creates more criminal activity. It makes us as a society more and more divided, because those who are that kind of, who have what Tom Hartman calls morbid wealth, they're morbidly wealthy, or they lock themselves up in gated communities so that they're safe. And outside, there are people who don't have enough food to eat while they have billions of dollars. And so we celebrate the occasional acts of charity, but it's not charity that we need. It's the kind of taxation that existed when, for example, Dwight Eisenhower was president.
Right.
And the people at the top then were paying much higher taxes. The revision of taxes in the society has been skewed toward the wealthy, so that the middle class is being hollowed out. And there's another reason why the middle class is being hollowed out, and that's the war against unions.
Yep.
In the 1930s, the Wagner Act made possible the expansion of unions, and by the 1950s, there were, I forget the exact percentage, but the unions were robust, and joining a union meant that for a person who was poor, they had a foot into the middle class. First of all, they had a job that was secure, they had a pension, and they had health care. I mean, that's...
And they had decent wages, wages
Yeah.
that were higher than average in
right.
society.
And I've noticed, for example, in education, the states that are most successful are those that have teachers' unions. Even they're absolutely demonized now, because the same people who've killed the unions in the private sector now want to kill the unions in the public sector. And the most powerful unions today are public sector unions, like the teachers' unions. So they say, oh, it's just the teachers' unions, they're being greedy. I mean, when people who are worth billions are accusing teachers of being greedy, you have to know something is wrong. What the teachers and the unions are really saying is people need an opportunity. They need a fair chance. And unions are very threatening to people who are wealthy, because it says we may have to pay more taxes. They will demand, instead of getting 50,000, they'll want 60,000. Or if they have 60, they'll want 70. So unions threaten people who are non-union, because they say, well, why should they have what we don't have? When really what they should be saying is, we should have the same that the unions have. We should join a union.
Exactly. Right.
Right. And so there are occasional outbursts now at places like Amazon and Starbucks and some of these other big corporations, but they have made billionaires by being non-union and by being able to pay their workers hourly wages instead of union wages. So I think the combination of the tax structure, which is the most important, and then the attacks on unions, which has caused them to shrivel to just public sector unions, has hollowed out the middle class. And that's very dangerous for our society. There's a book that I read a while back, written by two British sociologists, in which they said that the most equal societies are the happiest societies. Yep. It's called The Spirit Level.
Oh, sure.
The Spirit Level.
Right. I know about The Spirit
Level.
Book. Right. It goes back a few years.
Yeah, and when there's more equality, people feel happier.
Yep.
And you know, you look at when they do those ratings every year, or which are the happiest societies, it's usually the Scandinavian nations, where the taxes are high and there's lots of educational opportunity for everyone, and people are happy.
And you don't have these extremes of wealth and poverty.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So.
I think the extremes of wealth and poverty, the vast inequality, is the source of most of our problems today. And what we see, instead of addressing these problems, is an administration that's grifting and that's corrupt, where people are paying lobbyists to to buy pardons for them, where the president's sons are making fabulous real estate deals all over the world. Of course he's the beneficiary of this. And from what I've read in the paper, his wealth has doubled or tripled just in the last year since he's been president. The Congress has chosen to ignore the emoluments clause, which says you can't accept gifts from foreign countries. He just accepted a $400 million airplane a few months ago, which will cost $1 billion to be refurbished. And that's a violation of the Constitution. But the law
it doesn't seem to matter
No.
anymore. You know, and these are the same folks, these grifters that you're talking about, are the same folks that made such a big deal out of Hunter Biden. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Hunter Biden, I don't know what he did or what he didn't do, but they said he got $3 or $4 million. Now we have the president's sons opening up a club in Washington where the entry fee is $500,000. And they are going to make multi-millions from this. Is
Well, they actually only really think in billions now. It's horrifying.
And now the president is selling visas for $1 million each.
Something.
It's beyond my understanding. And I guess that the major culprit in this, aside from the people who are doing these things, is the Republicans in Congress who sit by idly and allow it to happen as if the Constitution doesn't exist.
And the Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court,
Right.
which says that this president has absolute immunity, so he is above the law. They can no longer say no man is above the law. This man is above the law.
This man, and he behaves that way.
Yes.
We are going to stop there. It has been a pleasure reading your book, talking to you about it. I want to thank you so much for being with us over 3 segments.
Well, thank you so much for reading my book and taking it seriously. It's the best thing that can happen to an author. Thank you.
That's fantastic. We've been speaking with Diane Ravitch. The book, once again, is An Education, How I Changed My Mind About Schools and Almost Everything Else. I'm Bob Herbert. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.